When one looks at the totality of this story, going back at the very least to 1987, there's a kind of Manchurian Candidate feel about it all, the degree to which the Russians have had their eye on Trump for so long. Talk about that first.
Well, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, this hasn't been continuous. I think it's been in phases. But what we can say is that Moscow's been interested in Trump for at least 30 years and probably longer. I mean, we have Ivana, a woman from communist Czechoslovakia, whom he married in 1977. And we know from archives held in Prague that Czechoslovak spies kept an eye on the Trumps in Manhattan, talked from time to time to Ivana's dad, still living behind the Iron Curtain. And they would have sent this, in the trade, it's called the kind of intelligence product, would have been sent back to the KGB in Moscow. So there will have been a file in Moscow on Donald Trump for a very long time. Initially, I think probably quite small, but it got bigger, and it got very much bigger after 1987 when, as you said, Donald Trump traveled to the Soviet Union for the first time with Ivana at the invitation of and on the dime of, or the ruble of, the Soviet government. And one of the things I discovered when I was researching my book was that the then Soviet ambassador, someone called Yuri Dubinin, went out of his way to kind of woo Donald Trump, literally got off a plane from Moscow, drove to Trump Tower, took the elevator up, knocked on the door and said, "Donald Trump, you have built the most beautiful skyscraper in America, if not the world. It's my great pleasure to meet you." Flattered him. And 4 or 5 months later, he's brought over to Moscow. Now, you have to ask yourself, why would the Soviets do that? I mean, what did they love his real estate design? No, of course not. They saw him as a target, as a kind of upwardly mobile American in business and possibly politics as well, who might prove useful to them in the months and years ahead.
And one of the things you point out is that all of the things that they were looking for in people that might be useful to them, in potential assets, that he checked off all the boxes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we know quite a lot about this period because after the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of the KGB records leaked. Separately, there was a defector who was secretly working as a double agent for British intelligence called Oleg Gordievsky. He's still alive, actually, living in the south of England. And he handed over top secret KGB memos to the British. And they revealed that during this period, Reagan is in the White House. There's some detente with Mikhail Gorbachev, who's the Soviet premier, but nonetheless, there's deep suspicion from the KGB towards America, as there was during all of the Cold War practically. But they were looking for Americans, and the boss of the KGB, someone called Vladimir Khrushchev, was sending out messages saying, "Find me more Americans. We need more American sort of top-level contacts." And there was a personality questionnaire which did the rounds, the kind of person they were looking for. They wanted people who were ambitious, vain, perhaps corruptible, narcissistic, unfaithful, and also people who were lousy analysts, and were perhaps suggestible. And you look at this questionnaire and you think, well, that's Donald Trump. He ticks every single box. And the strange postscript to his trip to the Soviet Union was that about 6 or 7 weeks after he came back, he took out 3 full-page adverts in a series of American newspapers, including the New York Times, criticizing Ronald Reagan's foreign policy. Now, why would a real estate guy do that? And separately, he let it be known that he was interested in going into politics, and moreover, he was interested in becoming president. Of course, it didn't happen for a long time, but I think whatever happened in Moscow, he came back with a new sense of strategic direction.
What do we think might have happened in Moscow?
Well, I mean, I think he would have been flattered. I think he would have been bugged. We know he was staying in the National Hotel just around the corner from Red Square and the famous tomb where Lenin is embalmed, and the Kremlin. And I think so his conversations would have been recorded. All of that material would have gone into the KGB's, by this point, much larger file on Donald Trump. And I think they would have kind of evaluated him to see whether he might be useful, whether he could do things which were politically helpful to the Soviet Union. Now, they had certain geostrategic goals at that point. They were very keen to drive a wedge between the United States and its European allies, for example, to sow divisions among NATO countries. Actually, the kind of things that have now come to pass under Donald Trump as president. But I think what happened after that, of course, is that Gorbachev lost control of the situation, the Soviet Union collapsed, and if you can call it Project Trump, kind of was mothballed and was then sort of subsequently revived at different moments. Trump went back to Moscow in the 1990s, but I think big time in 2013 and over the last 5 years.
And one of the things that certainly was critical during this period, from certainly in the mid-90s and even more so as we got closer to 2013, is the financial ups and downs of Trump and always needing money from somewhere.
Well, I mean, that's right. And again, this is factual, but we know that Russian mobsters bought condominiums in Trump Tower soon after it was completed in the 1980s. A couple of them went to jail, were convicted of federal crimes such as money laundering and racketeering. There was a famous Soviet underworld boss he's nicknamed Yaponchik. He was actually called Vyacheslav Ivankov, who moved from Moscow to Brighton Beach in 1992 and spent 3 years on the run from the FBI. They eventually caught up with him, and they discovered during this entire period he'd been living in Trump Tower secretly. And so there are long-standing questions about links between Russian money and Trump real estate and branded properties. I mean, we know, if you just take Trump out of the equation for a second, we know that real estate is kind of the best way of money laundering. But we also know that in the sort of post-Soviet period in the 1990s, there was no law in Russia. It was impossible to make a legitimate fortune. That there was massive corruption. That almost kind of the mafia and the government kind of fused to become a sort of single ruling group, and this has continued under Putin. I mean, he has a most kleptocratic regime. And then there are kind of further questions about what deals Donald Trump may or may not have made with Russian financial interests after the financial crash of 2008, when he was so broke he could no longer repay a big loan of $45 million to Deutsche Bank.
As one looks at the way this evolved in its time, since 1987 in particular, that it didn't necessarily involve a grand plan or a grand Project Trump, but that the degree to which they kept their eye on him, he also kept his eye on the Russians. And there was just needs that they both had during this period.
Yes, I mean, I think it's very important, Jeff, to be kind of clear that Vladimir Putin is not the master of the universe. He's not sitting in a kind of bat cave in Russia, flicking glowing red switches, making things happen here and there. And he's what you have to understand is that he's a classic opportunist. He's a cynic. I would say a nihilist as well, who just believes in his almost divine mission to rule Russia, to restore Russia to kind of greatness. And meanwhile, I would say to actually kind of plunder Russia so that he and the people around him are all multi-billionaires. They're some of the most sort of richest people on the planet. And obviously, he wants to find partners in various countries who can perform useful tasks and who kind of see the world that he does. And I think with Donald Trump, he found the ultimate transactional guy. And if you believe the dossier of Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer, the Russians have been quite energetically cultivating Trump for at least 5 years. They have been providing him with intelligence which might help his kind of political ambitions, and he has been shipping them details of what Russian oligarchs have been getting up to in the United States. And so this on-off relationship kind of was blossoming, and obviously when Trump entered the political fray as a presidential candidate, it went to an entirely new level.